So I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. We're excited about this one because we've got Gary Schneider from LinkedIn, who's going to be our speaker tonight. And I'm really excited, and I think it'll be a really good meeting. It is being recorded. If you want to play it back, we'll post it in a few days. Clean it up and post it in a few days so you can get it if you're not able to watch it tonight. So anyway. But I'm going to toss it over to our chairperson, Remington Maxwell, and so she can go over some of the SMPTE business that we like to take. Take it away, Rem.
Hi, I'm Remington Maxwell. I am the chair for this session. I want to introduce the rest of our board members, our past chair, Dom Jackson, our secretary and treasurer, Mona Smothers, and our managers, Sean Case, Bob Huddleston, Patty Leonard, Gil Mazzy, Paul Turner, and Tim Walker. If you haven't looked at SMPTE.org, they have redone the website. There's a lot of great information on there, so I encourage you to go over and check it out. Some of the things that you can kind of look into, they do have some webcasts, so if you are bored at home and want to be on your computer a little bit longer, that's an area that you can look into. They also have some virtual courses. I haven't looked or done any of them myself, but I have looked at them. They're quite interesting. And I would just check out the new website. They're really trying to revamp it. So see if there's maybe something that piques your interest. As always, we encourage membership, and that allows us to put on these wonderful meetings with great speakers. Once we get back to in-person meetings, we'll have speakers who might want to fly in, and we want to take them to dinner and stuff. So all of the proceeds from becoming a member help out with making our meetings even better. And I know we can't wait till we can kind of have some snacks before a meeting and whatnot. So we do have different membership options. If you're a recent graduate, they have an executive level for a student. Maybe you have a child, someone who's interested, and then also our professional level. They are kind of going away, phasing out the associate. So if you do have that, they are allowing renewals. They also have retired and a life member donation. And there's some of the membership pricing. Not too bad. And I'll hand it back to Patty.
Okay, great. Glad you guys could all join us tonight. I've got Gary Schneider here to do the presentation tonight. So we're really excited about that. He's the lead media systems architect for content technology engineering at LinkedIn Corporation. Gary focuses on infrastructure, which supports real-time media data in flight for video content producers at LinkedIn. Prior to LinkedIn, Gary was president of Media Vision Integration, Inc., an engineering and integration firm servicing both feature post-production as well as broadcast clients. Since 2015, Gary has been an early adopter of emerging technologies such as IP routing infrastructures and cloud production technology to support remote productions. The vision then and now is global interoperability of live production technologies between LinkedIn studios. Please welcome Gary Schneider. Gary, you can take over the screen when you want.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patty, Mona, and everybody. Let's see if
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to present. It was great for us to get connected. We got connected through Brian, right?
Right.
Brother, and it was great to connect with you and talk about some of the things that we were doing and that seemed like there might be an interest. What I thought I would do with this presentation, it was billed as, what are we doing for remotes and live and cloud, and there is a component of that. but I thought it might be worth taking everyone kind of through the journey. This going cloud and IP even was not reacting to anything. A lot of what we were thinking about doing, particularly with cloud, started almost 2 years to the day. And so it's been a journey of seeing what we can do with cloud and how we can leverage all that cloud can provide us to do real-time production of video. Before that. So I was going to start with a little icebreaker question, not something that we might answer right away, but maybe save it for the end. Just something that we can all talk about and maybe share some experiences after I've kind of gone through this. Simply I wanted to talk about, the what. What is it that we were trying to accomplish? And this will begin back in 2015. And then why? Why did the company have a vision for that? And then we'll kind of go through the journey of how we were building out our facilities over the last few years, and then talk about where we are at on current projects and what we're thinking about in the future. The icebreaker question is pretty simple and you've probably seen it before, but go ahead and read it. Was anyone actively involved in doing remote productions prior to COVID? How has COVID changed or validated your plans for remote productions? And how do you view cloud tech? And are there plans to integrate into current infrastructure? So starting in 2015, this is what the leadership had expressed to me when I came on board. Global interoperability between facilities, global management and control. They would use language best in class, leaders in tech, which said a lot to me, because that meant some investment on the part of the company, and I wasn't sure. This is LinkedIn. I know what their products are and the members and so forth, and really what was the vision. And I wanted to add that at the bottom because that's going to kind of play into as we get towards the middle and end. Our high-level initiative today within content technology engineering is Studio in the Cloud. And the tagline is any product or any production, any location. And that's kind of top level. When we're evaluating tech or workflows or how we want to accomplish things, it has to be able to support any production from any location. So the why, video content is the future for LinkedIn. So 2015, we weren't streaming onto the platform as we are today, but that was definitely a vision. It was a vision from the executives and through the content creators within the company that how we communicate out to customers as well as members is going to be through video content. And the company wanted to scale up to be able to address that. The increasing number of events and productions for internal meetings, customer productions and events. And I listed a few of kind of ongoing productions to kind of give everybody an understanding of what some of these events are like. Talent on Tap. We had our director of HR and talent acquisition. They would have a show. And we have a studio, and it would be a 3 or 4 camera shoot. We'd have guests in and create all this content for HR professionals and recruiters for other companies. Our customers are clients. Live with Marketers, speaker series. This is where we have prominent guests that will come in. Maybe they've written a book. Andre Iguodala was a guest who came in and had a great interview with our CEO, and we stream these out. And these are run from various venues within our environment, and we produce them from our control rooms. And then Talent Connect, I'll talk a bit about that because that was kind of the pinnacle of remotes, at least from a technology perspective. Producers and directors, they may have a different opinion on that, but hey, we all love each other. Other parts were, the acquisition at that time, 2015, acquisition of lynda.com. And that was bringing in, a large content creator into LinkedIn. And there was a lot of vision around what that would be, but there needed to be an infrastructure to be able to support that. And as that business grows, how do we scale, so on and so forth. And then Pulse Studios, which is now LinkedIn News, which was based in New York, same vision and potential for what the editorial team could be. So the next bullet, new media companies. Some may know what that means. I don't know if that's something that some of you are hearing for the first time, but I first heard it from a developer partner that we were doing business with, where they were looking at the tech companies as a new segment in broadcast. And it was, we have different kind of objectives because who are we? Who are some of these companies? Listing them out. I mean, Apple, I worked for Apple in 2004 and built out a high definition control room for product releases and all sorts of things that they were doing. But this was professional equipment and they were viewing it that way. Google, Cisco, our cousins at Microsoft, Facebook, Airbnb, Slack, all of these tech companies have groups within them that are focused on creating content that supports the lines of business within their companies and streams it out to the world. Of course, we all do some internal events, but there's a lot of the outward-facing events as well. So this was a large and a kind of a growing segment, and we as a collective group were getting some attention from the broader industry and recognizing what we were doing and why. One of the first meetings I had, I think the first question I got was, what in the heck does LinkedIn want to do with this stuff? And kind of walk the person through. And I think it seemed like it was an eye-opener to them, but it worked. I wanted to call out, within Silicon Valley, there is Silicon Valley Video Group that's run by Marty Porter, who has started the sports video group. And Marty had recognized that new media was doing some really powerful things, and our workflows and how we were approaching some of our events was very similar to what he had been seeing in sports television. And so he had started, pulling some of the engineers and producers and directors from other companies in Silicon Valley to come together and say, hey, let's get together on a routine basis and share stories and talk about how we're doing things, and just a brain share. And that's been a wonderful thing. It's a really, really amazing community. Not one I recall from post-production for sure, walking around and sharing ideas like that, but these peers that I have an opportunity to work with are pretty amazing. And along with that, LinkedIn is like a production house out in the world where we have writers and directors and DPs and producers, media ops. We have all of those teams in executing all manner of productions. And it's quite a challenge because our productions vary from one to the other. It's not doing one of the same studio, same backgrounds, all of that. A lot of things takes a lot of work to switch a studio or a venue from one event to another. And I think we have a wonderful team that takes that on. Also, I was going to speak a little bit about the studio engineering team at LinkedIn. We are one team. We all work together and we all collaborate together. Our focus sometimes is a little different. I focus on the production side, and there's a group of the team that is focused on post-production. And when I get into some of the new projects, talk about how cloud technology is supporting that. But it's worth a discussion all on its own. How you deal with storage and media asset management and leveraging cloud. So this was the start. How are we going to accomplish global interoperability and all of these things? And this is a drawing from quite a while ago, but this is what I was doing and focused on in 2016 when we were bringing up the first two studios, San Francisco and the Sunnyvale Pastoria facility. And each facility is pretty much built similarly. We were 2022-6 and TR04. AES-67 was primary component in what we wanted to do. And in evaluating technology at the time, there weren't many players who checked all the boxes. There were players that were doing IP. Most of you here can probably guess who some of those were, and definitely spoke with them. But there were limitations in that the hardware would work perfectly within that environment and with their hardware. And that wasn't something that I felt was scalable, because we want to be able to share media between facilities. And that was not possible at this time. So took this approach of all the groups that we talked with. The GV node was a new product that was being developed and coming out of Grass Valley, and was introduced to the product. We met, we talked about roadmap and how is this, what do I get today? How is it going to get us to where we want to go? For us buying into a technology, it's really important that we understand the roadmap of the company and what the vision is. And will that work within our place? If it's here's our box and it does X, that's not always the way we want to go. And certainly in the early days of 2022, there was not many manufacturers that were providing those interfaces directly on their equipment. But this kind of design kind of shows how we were able to share media between sites. We went with the lower end Cisco routers, switches, the Catalyst. That's not what a lot of people who are running media networks are doing. It tends to be the Nexus series of Cisco switches and DCNM to run that. When we started getting into the two facilities on the right, we actually wanted to have a media network there. These two sites, Sunnyvale, Unify, and Mountain View, they're about 2 miles apart. And we had dark fiber between them. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to see how we can scale these kinds of networks and have a single controller and routing platform that runs two facilities that are separated by some distance. It was a good way of testing things without having to go through these circuits and things like that. So it was a really good test bed to make that happen. We did look at Cisco, and I think what had us go with Arista was just the simplicity. To build a media network, again, at this time, spine leaf, DCNM to control the network. The first time I looked at the DCNM interface, it's like, oh, I need to be a data center engineer, and I'm not. So this, how are the EICs going to be able to support this and troubleshoot and find issues and so forth if they have to dive deep into something like that? So it kind of came off the table. Arista, presented a solution for us and how we could use that by just literally having 2 switches, not true spine leaf, but just trunking between them. And this all worked. And so not only did the Unify and Together, which is the Mountain View facility, operate well together, we could share with the other facilities. 2022 uncompressed. We had limited bandwidth. That's what you'll see on the right. We have a Catalyst with 10 gig connectivity to a core router, and that feeds our WAN. We have a queue on the BIS QoS schema. We mark our traffic on ingress, and the networking team from LinkedIn, who was very open to this type of design and putting video on the network in this way, they had, they wanted to take a smart approach. But one of the things that impressed me from day one with LinkedIn was the network engineering team being open to, hey, let's just have a discussion. Tell me what you need. What is this going to do? And it wasn't the instant, pushbacks and things like that. It was like, geez, you guys really want to have a conversation. Never had that before. But they were instrumental, and they still are in many ways on how we get the bandwidth and the support that we need to make some of these things happen. I'll also note that even early on, we knew that because the way the industry is thinking now, even with 2110, is that you have locally generated PTP reference to a GPS through a GPS antenna, and we had done that early on. And we did PTP primarily because of TR04. AES67 needed PTP. We had that in there. Didn't really need it for the GV nodes, but this gave us the core that we need and that we're transitioning to today. So I think we actually planned pretty well on this part of it. So, what are some of the things that we get with that type of design? Resource management, technical and human. And so on the technology side, I've used this phrase a lot internally, where I'll say, it's not that each facility in the Bay Area has a streaming encoder, it's that we have 5 streaming encoders in the Bay Area. Every device is a resource on a network. And if we're streaming out of Mountain View and for whatever reason, the streaming encoder, the Elemental Live goes offline and we're not able to use it, it's fairly quick to route a feed to another site that has an operating streaming encoder and stream out of that site. Because all of our network, we are a segregated network, and we route, it means that the stream operator who's sitting at a PC who's doing that config of the Elemental, it's just another web browser tab to get there. There's no VNCing or anything like that to get into some machine to get into that encoder. All of our devices, streaming encoders, H.264 encoders, decoders, all of those it's all routable, and we can hit anyone from anywhere. If I'm on VPN, which I am right now, I can hit any one of them. And that was a good feature, and it really helped when we got into a pinch on something. This one we've used a little bit, but I think it has proven its worth, which is 2 productions in a day, one in San Francisco, one in Sunnyvale. The team can choose where they want to sit to produce both those shows. instead of running between San Francisco and the South Bay, let's say, hey, you know, one of these is in the South Bay or in San Francisco, let's set up there, and we will run a show from San Francisco, and then the engineers will point or connect that control room to the second venue to produce that show. There's a lot of little details and tricks that go into that, and I kind of highlight that part of it because all of this experience has kind of driven where we're going with a lot of the new technology, whether it's cloud or 2110. And most everything that we do is remote. While I was putting this together, I thought a lot about this because, you know, I used to say to people in the team, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's 50 feet, a mile, 400 miles, 3,000 miles, 5,000 miles. It doesn't matter. You're in your environment, you're in your control rooms. We will connect and get video and audio to and from where it needs to be, and you'll be able to communicate and produce your shows regardless of where that other end is. Are there latencies and things? Sure, but I'll kind of show what the technology was and how we did that. But we were talking in the 90 milliseconds in most cases, which is, I think, incredibly acceptable. And I'm going to move to this. So as an example of some of the devices, this doesn't show everything, but it's intended to kind of give an idea of, we have 4 control rooms, and each control room, most of them are associated with a venue. A venue has an audience, a studio is a studio. That's how we kind of differentiate between the two. So we have camera controllers, robotics, telemetrics, camera controllers. We have routing panels, readable intercoms, and back in the day, H.264, I see this is 2110 workflow. That's incorrect. Blew it on my slide. Sorry, folks. In high vision Makitos doing SRT, H.264 between sites. We can also add studios and venues. And one of the things that became clear early on was it's not a one-for-one. We shouldn't be thinking that anytime we build a studio or a venue that we need to have an associated controller. With a venue, often we would put kind of a small console in there that had a small audio mixing console so that they could mix in room. We had tools that would allow, in each of our venues, I don't think I had a picture of our venues. We have large video walls, and there would be a tech that would be switching content to the video walls. So simple things could be done in the rooms without having to have a big control room. But I showed it one-to-one, but it doesn't need to be one-to-one. So venues that don't require or don't have really associated control rooms is Unify in Sunnyvale and our New York. New York has both a venue and a studio. And we've run productions from there to Mountain View and done full productions that way. And so now I'm just kind of trying to illustrate, what was it like to do this when we were going to connect or send a camera from facility 1 to facility 2, the steps that you'd have to go through to set this up. And of course, it wasn't just one camera, it was 5. And not to mention other content. Sometimes it was other content, other times we might share content from another location. You have to make your routes, you have to go into your Makito, you have to configure it for its destination, go to the decoder and configure it to receive a stream, and then route it to its final destination. And that was a lot of steps, particularly if you're sending, 8 streams and so forth. And, granted, you had the ability to do presets, and we did all of those things to try to make this process faster, but, you're having to manage ports and all sorts of things that it's not easily done in this type of setup because they're each individual appliances. And I'm also making that point for some things that I'm gonna show you, I think, next a little bit. So I don't know how this normally works. If people like to ask questions as we go, or if you like to save it for the end. Probably should have asked that earlier.
Sorry, yeah, if anybody wants to ask anything, you can put something in the chat, or now that we've taken a little pause, if anybody has any questions before Gary goes further, go ahead and unmute yourself. But typically we usually put stuff in the chat and then go back to that. But go ahead and
Okay.
ask your questions. You want to ask? Does anybody have a question?
I got a question. So Gary, I've used LinkedIn for a long time, but I wasn't aware of any video services. Can you give us a quick description of what LinkedIn provides as far as videos and what the studios are used for?
Sure. So content technology supports 4 lines of business, 4 verticals, if you will. LinkedIn
Right.
Media Productions, live and video production. The live team, I believe Dan, who manages the team, is on the call. They manage all of those live events, the live productions, live streams, all of that. Anything that is, even if it's a live switch to tape or storage, and do top and tails and have it available for VOD, that team does that. The video production team, they're focused on like stories around and within LinkedIn. I may not have that exactly right, but they're kind of focused, I think, in creating stories around members and customers and other things, and also involved in some of the talent on tap or live with marketer types. Not live with marketer so much, because that's a live switch. But so there's those 2 groups. There's LinkedIn Learning. So LinkedIn Learning was what the old Linda.
Yeah, I remember your slides on that. I just want, from the business side, I've never seen any of it. How would I, as a customer, or maybe I'm not the target customer, would I ever see any of those assets?
I think that you would see some. We are doing some live streaming to our platform. How it's calmed out, I mean, that I'm not entirely sure. If it's live with marketers, they're focused on the marketing customers and those professionals and people who have that as part of their profile and membership, and how that gets out there. I don't know how generally some of those things are put on the platform. But it's really from the external facing, it's really supporting the lines of business that we have, the recruiting, sales, marketing, and those are our big products for enterprise companies. And there are certainly some stories that end up on the site for general consumption.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And I think what we can do, if you're interested in more, maybe I can ask one of my brothers or sisters that's on the call to maybe put something in the chat, because I know that there are links to help people kind of find some of that stuff. What happened? Here we go. So the next evolution of what I was showing before was, it was becoming really, as everything was scaling, it was becoming really complicated to manage all of those encoder and decoder appliances and managing all of that. Each one just unique. Which one am I using? Number 2, number 3, which is that? What's it called? What's the host name? All of those things. It just wasn't very simple to see what was going on. Latency was also not a huge problem, but it was a minor issue, and it was something that we could look at and say, it's okay. And so we wanted to look for kind of leveling up that whole core infrastructure and how that would work. And what we chose was Net Insight's product, the Nimbra MSRs, Nimbra 640s and Nimbra 680s. And we placed them out in various sites that we wanted to have that level of interop. And we have Nimbra Vision, which is that single pane of glass that allows us from that one point to dig into any one of those devices and check configs and do all of that and do some management. We don't necessarily leave tunnels up all the time. So to be able to turn tunnels up and down and just see what the traffic is and so forth, Nimbra Vision was great to be able to tie into that. Resiliency, it's 1+1 in this configuration. So if we do have a failure on a link, that we have a path that can get us to our destination. If Doug will correct me if I'm wrong, he's on the call. If I don't know, what's that? New York and Dublin. If New York and Dublin, we lose, there is that alternate path to get video over to Dublin. So we're not dead in the water with this kind of setup. And that was a big advantage. Compression codec is J2K, so that's a lot faster than you see from H.264. So there was great improvement there. I'd like to relay that two things that saved us with this setup was we did a production in a venue in New York, and the venue in New York is very wide and shallow. So people were spread out, and there's a lot of projection screens that were up. So the ask was for iMac, and we thought, oof, okay, we'll try this. So that entire show was cut from Mountain View. So we had to backhaul all of our video and audio back to Mountain View, and the TD controlled the in-room experience through the Carrera switcher and would return video and content, and based on run of show would have that appear. And when iMag came up, it was amazing. We couldn't have done that with the other appliances. So this really kind of leveled up what we were able to do. And that was huge. The other bullet point that I'm adding is that there is 2110 support on the Nimbra MSRs. And you'll see this again on future slides and how we intend to use this within our environments as they're continuing to develop. So I see that I have, yeah. So the Talent Connect is, so Talent Connect is one of our larger shows. It's outward facing. They're held in convention centers and venues in different parts of the country. And it's a 3-day event of live streams, other content that gets rolled into that VOD. And this was kind of the pinnacle on how we could do remotes and how remotes could work. So a little diagram again on sorry, just putting my notes together. So I'm going to kind of start in the middle. So as you can see, there are a couple of MSRs there, one at the venue and one in Mountain View. For this particular show, we used the switch and provisioned the circuits and bandwidth that we needed to execute on this show. And there were two things that were going on here, and you can see them in red and blue. We had video paths, but we also had an Ethernet path. So if you've worked with the switch before or worked with this hardware before, this is a feature that the Nimbras provide, which is a layer 2 Ethernet channel, which is essentially a really, really long cable. And what this did for us was it allowed us to extend our network on the Ethernet side. And what it also did, even before that, is it allowed us to completely test out the entire system in Mountain View before we shipped it to the venue. Because all the devices were IP'd on that subnet. And so we could uplink that switch with all of that equipment. We could configure our router for the field. We could build up our salvos and test them. We could configure our intercoms and test them and do all of that work on site to minimize what had to be done out in the field. And then extend that just across the switch. So when we would arrive at the venue, the first thing we would do is open up our primary rack, turn on our switch, do the uplink, tell the switch engineer that's what we want first is Ethernet, and fire that up, and we see Mountain View. And it was an invaluable part of the workflow to be able to have that level of control. The devices that I'm showing are, we had an Ultrix router in the venue, and I was the engineer in Dallas and Anaheim, and the other members of the team were in Mountain View. But I had router control of the GV node in Mountain View, and I had obviously control of the Ultrix, but they had the same thing. And that meant we could work together as a team. If a route needed to be made, we don't need to call somebody on intercoms to go do something. We can execute on it. We did have Makito encoders from breakout rooms and for some backup and redundancy, intercom and storage. So I'm showing these little quantum boxes that we had. So we did local records, and there was media on the cameras, so all manner of backups to the backups to make sure that we got all the video content that we needed. And if a record failed for whatever reason, we had some fail, we had the backup on media cards, we would do the ingest to the local storage, and then as I'll show you in the next slide, what we did there. But on the Mountain View side, same equipment, plus Control Room B, that was focused on All Access Studio, which is a 4-camera, kind of Today Show, Ellen style set where people would do interviews, they would do demos of some tech and all of that. But both of those production switchers were in Mountain View. So this kind of goes into some of the detail. I spoke to the first part on top, but we leveraged the switch. We had 8 channels going one direction to another, 500 megabits of Ethernet. That was to extend the network, and then we had Aspera running so that we could push that media from the venue back to Mountain View, and the post-production work happened in Mountain View. And one of the key learnings that we did over time was, when we first did a Talent Connect in 17, or 2016, in kind of the old way with a NAS storage box. I mean, the editors, nobody made it to dinner. When we were in Nashville, they all made it to dinner with this workflow. Being able to get all of this recorded and post-production happening right away meant that they didn't have to stay up all night waiting for large amounts of data to get ingest and so forth. And that saved a lot. We ran local AS67 and Dante networks, and we actually tied multiple together. We had an in-room vendor for general session, and the Dante system that supported the live streaming that was going to be happening at a Mountain View, but we tied all of these networks together so that we could all share the media. And All Access Studio was also tied into that as well. Riedel intercom systems and Bolero wireless. Again, we had 3 artist frames that we had tied together for the 3 teams that were running this, and we had 2 main engineers that were just focused on intercom, and that was really successful. To get audio back and forth, audio embedding on the video channels. So that we feel was kind of a pain point, and we think that the future is going to make this a lot simpler. The pain points were the run of show, tech based on the run of show. And what I mean by that is the producers and the team who was engaging the talent and so forth, they the run of show was constantly changing. When is this talent going to show up? And they are prominent individuals that are going to be speaking, so their time limits are dead on. You have to be X and that's it, and they're going to give you the 10 minutes and then they're gone. And as they were constantly changing all of this, there were a lot of manual steps that we had to take to be able to adjust how the tech was going to work with that run of show, because salvos were a big component of that. We purchased a number of video channels that we needed, the most we needed at one time, but not total. So we could have doubled the number of channels based on what we really needed to do, but now you're just throwing money away. If we were to be smart about it, we needed to think about how that would work. And each routing system would have salvos associated with the run of show. And if anything changed, it was a lot of manual work to get all of that to happen. And we think that we can improve that in the future. The different routing platforms, more minor, but it was still a thing. And stowaway audio, that's what I'm calling, that was the embedding. If you have 8 microphones from folks, and we had a local mixer for what was happening at the studio, but we still had to embed all of that audio and get it back to our broadcast A1 in Mountain View. So now you're stringing up a bunch of audio channels on some video channel, and then you have to, through level mapping, pull all of that audio apart and get it into the right faders on the audio mixer. So, it all worked, but it was a real cumbersome process. And it was one that, again, as we look to the future and how some of these productions can happen, we think there are lots of areas of improvement, doing things a little bit differently. And then I thought I'd show this is a picture of the 2 control rooms in Mountain View. The near control room was control room A. This was master control. The far control room was control room B. So it ran all access, and the outputs of that fed into the master control, where graphics and other elements were added. It was fed into the run of show. Sometimes we would run this into a dream catcher, and if we had to kind of delay the stream because of other content that was still running, but we had a lot of those systems in place to be able to manage a clean run out of the media. I'll pause for a sec. I need water. So one of the new current projects that we're working on is calling it unified video routing. It's really media routing, but we call it UVR. And so I thought I'd kind of take a step back just to say, you know, remember this slide. This is kind of how we had things connected and working, and all the different devices and controllers and so forth, and on how to make that work in a 2022 environment. But today, it's looking a little bit more like this, where a venue, a studio, a podcast booth, a voiceover is all going to be running their format of 2110, -20, 22, 30, or 40. And each environment is going to be managed and controlled by a local controller. The idea here is that although we have separate controllers at each facility, we can still have these controllers talk to each other, and we can create router control panels that can speak to both of those controllers and pass information through, so that instead of doing 2 punches on one router control in one facility and 2 in the other, we can do 2 punches or 1 and execute a route from facility 1 within facility 1 or from facility 1 to facility 2. Now, probably the first question might be how, and what's that purple line? If you see the purple line. The purple line is a question, sort of a question. We have 2 options on how we want to, how we think we can accomplish this. The first is with the Nimbra MSRs. The Nimbra MSRs will take in 2110 and they will do what they do on the input side. And they essentially work as you would with a baseband SFP loaded into that cage. You know, video 1, that interface is video 1, and interface on the other side can be video 1. And all of those gateways, if you will, they're 2110, they're the embryonics 2110 SFPs. They are ISO 4, ISO 5 compliant. They get registered on the server and they'll be able to operate within the environment. The trick will be, you know, if we want to do a 2-punch to make a complete route from source A to source B through the controllers. And, you know, the easy answer is we can do that through salvos, but we'd like it to be a little bit more elegant, that we're talking directly to the controllers and through ISO 5 and manage the receivers joining a particular flow. But our fastest way to get to this is with hardware we already have, because the tunnels will support this, and it'll be 2 separate IP spaces on the multicast side. You won't have to do anything fancy, which the fancy thing is another way of looking at this. But that's how we intend to accomplish this. And we're in process of bringing up our actually I showed Mountain View, New York, but San Francisco is going to be first. And Tim on our call here is the engineer that's working on getting that up. The second method for doing this is a little bit unknown, but it is in process. The Video Services Forum has an activity group which is focused on 2110 WAN. And 2110 WAN is the whole, kind of the main components behind it is creating tunnels between locations so that if you're on a public or a lease circuit or something like that, you're not likely to get multicast traffic across that. Nobody wants to manage that. We hear that internally in terms of, I want to run multicast on the network. Well, we'd rather you didn't. Okay, we can come up with other ways. But the idea behind 2110 WAN is that IPs would come into a gateway. They would get encapsulated in a UDP tunnel and it would get pushed. The controller would whitelist the IPs and report that over to the other controller. And that's all. Then that's communicated to the receiving gateway, which unencapsulates and NATs the IPs or to the IP scheme on the receiving side. And we'll also tell the receiver which flow to join. So it's a lot more that's going on. We're big on standards-based and interoperability and so forth. And I know Net Insight is as well. So, not sure, we've had brief conversations about the plans around how 2110 fits in their world, but, we think we're on a good path right now with that hardware. We're just replacing baseband SFPs with 2110 SFPs, and that will get us up and going. And that's something that we're testing this quarter. So that's kind of where this project is at. Another benefit that I thought of later that I wanted to call out was, I'm not sure if anyone has heard of Ipmx, something that the AIMS group has been proposing or putting out there. And it's IP media experience, and it's kind of focused on the AV space, but it's based on 2110. And so there are possibilities and potentials for interoperability with Ipmx equipment and professional equipment running 2110-20 3040. It's very early on, but we do see it as an advantage because our unified communications team, they're the ones that are dealing with all the displays that go up for employee comms. We don't really know what's happening regarding going back to buildings and so forth, but we have been talking about those things. And when evaluating equipment on the pro AV, prosumer side, we ask those questions about Ipmx and who's on board with it and so forth. And that can just help kind of scale out this network even more, support more things. Ultimately, this means scale. Any one of those individual facilities that I showed, that can be replicated anywhere within our environment and in different regions. I mentioned that New York and the West Coast are pretty much tied together and have been for some time. But, we have a new building in London. They do some productions out of there. We would love to have some back-end equipment so that the team that we have in Dublin can produce some of those shows in the same way that we do in North America. It saves day hires, it saves the equipment rentals and all sorts of things. So we look at this as it's an advantage. Virtual controls. Jeez. So the virtual control, this is another of our new projects. And I thought I'd start by just saying that, COVID, as disruptive as it was to the world in general, for us, it was, we're shutting down, you're out of offices, you all work from home. And the content producers, were kind of struggling. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? So Blue Jeans Prime Time and things like that. And, that was okay. And in some instances, it wasn't. And the team was really trying to focus on how can we kind of get back to a workflow that has the production value that we had previously, and that would get the customers happy with, with what they were getting. So it's not only, so the workflow that was come up with was, that the team came together with was this. This was kind of an interim step for us into kind of being out of the office. LinkedIn's rules are, nobody goes into an office. And I know that there are other companies, even our cousins, that still go into buildings. We don't. We had to kind of think of how we were going to accomplish some of these things completely remotely. So engineers on our team, Tim Nesbitt, Chris Orfatelli, Jeff Milnes, and Derek Woodworth spent a lot of time to kind of put this flow together. We use these devices called production bots. They run Vmix. They have the Corvid 88 cards, shout out AJA. And this was all done, virtually remotely. Everything required a VNC of some sort to get into a box and a device and to configure it and set it up and troubleshoot and so forth. So although it served its purpose, and it is still serving its purpose, it doesn't check all the boxes for Studio in the cloud. It's not scalable, and it's not designed to operate as cloud is intended to operate, meaning, elastic compute. This is an application that runs on a Windows box. So can you put that in a VM? Yes. How do you get your video feeds up into Azure AWS? There are a lot of complexities around that, but this definitely served the purpose, and the team put a lot of effort into getting this up and running. And I thought it was worth shouting them out here, because that was a lot of work. So this is kind of our first look at Nimber Edge, which was an offering that I think came up a couple of years ago. So I think I said at the beginning that February of 2019 was, you need to be 90% in the cloud. And I started having conversations with some of these developers to see, do they have a vision for it, or what is their vision, and how do we see this working? And, they, Net Insight had kind of explained what this was all about and what it was to be. In October of 2019, we did a test where we had our CEO was in Dublin, and we ran the switch, but we ran this in parallel just to test. And, there was a 2-second difference in what was coming over the switch versus what was coming over this. Overall, coming from Dublin, I don't know, not too bad. It all worked. It was good quality audio and video, and it was very simple to set up. The way Edge works is you have your Edge appliance and you configure it, and all you really need when you plug it into a network is DNS and DHCP. Once it receives its IP and it's online, it phones home. It phones home to the Edge, and it appears in the cloud from a control perspective. And once you have that connectivity, you can create your inputs and outputs. You don't have to be logging into the box to do it. It's actually where all the configuring happens within the Edge environment, and then Edge pushes that config out to the Edge appliance and turns up the inputs and outputs however you have that configured. And so running this from on-prem to outside, what is one of the use cases? One of the use cases here is if, from the LinkedIn Learning side, if live action is doing a remote live action from an author from their house, they're already sending kits out with cameras and microphones and so forth. So we include one of these appliances, and they patch it in, it connects to Edge, and now the producer has access to this appliance and can make sure everything's working and operating. They can see input. They can make some simple changes, or I mean, they have full access to the device. So there's actually a lot that you can do when you're connected through Edge. Once you have everything set up, we have an interface that looks like this, where you have thumbnails of all of your sources coming in. You can see we have sources from Dublin, from Napa, from San Francisco, from New York. Everything feeds into this environment, and we can route to whatever destination, studio, or control room that we would want, or simply a CER where we would be doing a direct ingest into storage, which is one of the problems that we were trying to solve, because currently when the authors are out at their homes doing this, they're recording to a local laptop and they have to upload all of that, and upload speeds are horrible. So, there were 700 hours of upload a quarter, and that was something we were trying to solve by, hey, let's just go direct to our storage. And Edge provided a really simple way of doing that. Also in Edge, just showing a little quick screenshot of what you can get in terms of analytics from a flow. And you can see all points in the flow, the input, the appliance, and that video region, that's Edge running in Azure. I don't have a route on the other side, but it gives you some clues on what you're getting in. And that's all reported up from the Edge appliance. Now kind of getting into the processing side of things, and that's where AMP comes in. This is a real simple illustration because it is fairly simple how this works. We have on-prem servers that run the video processing software, but that same process can happen in Azure. I listed the two compute nodes that we're using right now, but you can have a group of those living in Azure and a group, and you can have ins and outs. You can configure inputs and outputs. You have to be kind of strategic about how you do that, because it's not easy to share inputs from one device to another because there is added latency there. So you just have to be thoughtful of what process you're running on what device. If it's some downstream process, yeah, you can run that on another processor if you're running out of compute or GPU on the first unit. If that made sense to everybody. And then the orchestration layer for AMP lives today in their AWS. And the red lines, this was simple. From connectivity from the hardware to the AMP orchestration layer is really simple. It's a VPN, and it's an outbound VPN from our site. So from a network security perspective, it's no open ports, no whitelisting IPs. It's nothing like that. It's just allowing VPN traffic out and nothing's coming back in. It is essentially a tunnel. The control messages are happening in the VPN tunnel. So that was very easy to kind of get online internally. I think Mike talked a bit about this last week, where we have clients that are operating on Macs or PCs. They have applications, GVUI, which is an app that runs on either, or the web clients, which use Chrome browser. And you can have access to all the controls of any of the workloads that are running on those devices. So it's pretty clean. I think it's pretty elegant how it all goes together. Once you have the VPN running, things just work. What I really appreciate from from Grass in this instance is how they update. They provide updates and announcements on what's going to get updated and when. What that means is you can set your workloads to either stay on a particular version or to automatically update. So if you're about to do a show and they say they're going to do a push, you want to set everything to specific so that things don't get upgraded 10 minutes before a show. And all of that happens through from the orchestration layer and pushes out to the appliances. And they're doing a lot of development all the time and bug fixes and all of those things. And they're working really hard, and they're turning new features on constantly. I don't want to speak too much for them, but I will say that they had a roadmap pre-COVID on how they were going to execute things. And when I first met them on what this was, they were very determined to not release anything that wasn't ready to go to market. They wanted it to be clean and perfect. COVID kind of blew that up, but the team is working really hard to be as close to that as possible. And I applaud them for it. Another quick image. This is kind of just another way of looking at the previous, but what this is kind of showing is in our very near future, because this is ongoing right now, is we have our team that's focused on storage in Azure. And I'm a firm believer that we need to be thinking direct ingest into Azure. How are we going to accomplish that? Well, there are ways that we'll be able to do that, but we need to make sure that our particularly our Azure nodes are going to be able to work, and how Grass has set up their APIs to record to blob storage in Azure. Those are things that haven't been completely settled. They're doing it to S3 buckets today, so we believe it's just an API change to get it to work with Azure Blob. But that's something that we hope to test within the next quarter or so. Because it's all about getting the media into the right storage, cataloged properly through media asset management so that the post-production professionals can get in there and do their work as quickly as possible. Some of the interfaces, if you folks in Grass Valley, and if you know the products, this is the KSP. The KSP has been around for a while. It works with the K-frames. Well, it works with the virtual K-frame as well. So TDs don't necessarily have to have a full Carrera. I have a full Carrera here. They can operate simple shows with this, 1ME, one stripe KSP and cut simple shows. And I think that's a great feature, particularly since the team has been using the KSP for a while. It's not learning something new. This is just a small little cutout of the audio mixer. Assign your sources. Audio provides things like breakaway on the audio channels. It's not really necessary, but on the video channels it is. Breakaway just means if you want audio to pass and it's muted, you have to have audio breakaway on, and then audio will pass. It has a compressor, has the ability to do some delay, solo track assignment. So if you get 16 tracks on a feed and you're only going to operate a stereo pair, you can select which tracks you're going to operate on any one fader. So it's a basic audio mixer. The aux up above, I kind of skipped over that, but that's how you configure your mix minus. And it's all very simple to set up and configure. This is a view of router panels. I'm not sure if Mike showed this last week. I can't remember. I was on the call, or last month. But you can create the panels that only show those sources and destinations that are necessary for that production. And you can lock destinations as well. You have a lot of those same features that you would have in a kind of a typical NV9000 routing system, for lack of a better term. And all of this is configurable through a GUI interface, and very simple to do. You can relabel things. I have long names for a lot of our workloads, and I did that specifically so I could tell that workload is associated with this fabric. Because if you have all your fabrics being shown in your resource manager, it can be confusing. Which one am I really wanting? So I name things long. I give them long names, but you're able to give the short names here and make it easier for the operators. And this feature, this is a dashboard. And the way this is operating today is, all of your inputs, you place a widget on the screen, you assign a particular workload, which could be, in this case, these are SRT inputs, and you get the thumbnails from the streams. We also, off to the left, are NDI sources that are currently not being used, and we also have 2022 sources on this particular fabric. So depending on what the show is and what we're trying to accomplish, we would choose one of those 3 methods of bringing video into the system. But for a simple way of turning things up and down, that play stop button up above where it says SRT inputs, basically that's a control widget that you can assign different workloads to, and you can shut them down and you can turn them back up. So it's an easy way of doing that where you don't have to go to the resource manager view to do some of those things. And then you kind of build it out. You build your signal flow out. And this is a great tool for the EICs who are managing the show. They can see all steps in the signal flow. And if there is an issue in any one of them, they can click on it and it will take them directly to the config of that particular workload, where they can look at logs and they can get other information specific to that workload. And it helps, it's a quick way of drilling down in the design and troubleshooting whatever problems might be. Same thing on the output sides. The device here that's labeled FM is a flow monitor. Flow monitor you can assign or route. Audio only sources, if you're just like, if an A1 on that mixer is gonna solo something, there is a specific output from that mixer that is the solo path. And if you send that solo path to a flow monitor, when they solo, they're gonna hear that. And that's how you accomplish some of those features. And that is the dashboard. I'll talk, I know I'm running over. I really thought that I was going to be short, but I'm not going too long. I wanted to go back a bit to Talent Connect and just say, you saw everything that we needed to do to make Talent Connect happen. Well, in an AMP world, this is what we would need to make Talent Connect happen. We wouldn't have to have the switch to be sending media back to Mountain View, because we can place our servers and have all the uncompressed video happening on-prem. All we would do is, through the orchestration layer, have our Carreras or KSPs tie in through that cloud instance and control those devices. And that could be done anywhere. It doesn't need to be in a control room. It could be at a Pete's Coffee. My favorite. So the look of how we can accomplish some of these remotes and the advantages of cloud, I think are really evident and incredibly amazing. What we're going to be able to do as all of this continues to mature. And it does have a way to mature. I think all involved in this stuff couldn't disagree with that. But where it is right now is it's working. There are pretty large companies who make their money off doing broadcasts are on the platform, and they're operating. So that is that. And then, you know, yeah, the last slide is, hey, Studio G. So that's here in Napa. That's what a control room of the future can look like. And what scares my team about this picture is I think I can actually cut a show. But with Dan's help, maybe I can. So the future, and I'll try to go through this quickly. I appreciate everybody hanging in with me. The future is really about automation. So showing you all of those pain points earlier, those were a lot of learnings that we had as we went through this process and thought, you know, God, how can we make this better? How can we make all of this work? And, you know, what would be kind of the dream workflow? And, you know, in my view, it's going to start with scheduling the production. And two of our teams have two different tools, Write and Cosmo. And they're going to say, hey, we have dates and times for rehearsals and productions. Okay, that's good information that we can pull from. They have tech requirements, you know, which studio and venue, and then what cameras, what playouts, what sources. This is working you know, on-prem, but you know, the same kind of concept can work in a cloud-only environment. Resource scheduling. So that can be human as well as technical as well. If you need a particular streaming device, you want to reserve that so that if there are other productions that are getting scheduled, people will get flagged that you know that device is not available at the time, and people can make decisions on how they want to do that. Perhaps they say, well, is there another one available at the same time? You know, this whole tool needs to be interactive that way so that we can build at least, you know, 70, maybe 70, 80% of what we actually want, and knowing that we're not going to get it 100%, but we're going to have to go in there and do some tweaks and adjustments to it. And that's what the EICs are going to end up having to do. But that's an important part. Bandwidth reservations, the same thing. A dashboard creation, we would love to see a dashboard populate with at least the widgets that we've called out in terms of the tech. If we have this tech, we're going to need certain devices. So those devices get called out and widgets get created from that. And again, go in there and make final tweaks. Because ultimately, when you're ready to go, what you want to do is push that dashboard. That dashboard has the config of what you're trying to accomplish. And deploying all of that on the hardware, whether it's the on-prem hardware or the cloud, spin all of those services up and have them available. Have a little green light go on, tells the EIC, hey, this has been deployed. EIC goes in and validates that the deployment worked properly. We need to be able to manage tunnels through this process so that the tunnels are up, they're of the proper size based on what we're doing and what other productions might be happening at the same time. So we have to have a way of managing the bandwidth. We have limited bandwidth. Execute on-prem routes and view metrics and all of those things. So the last note, I think I talked a bit about this, is that the Video Services Forum are working on cloud and on-prem interoperability from a standards perspective. What are some of the things that developers need to think about and be consistent with to fall into, you know, a SMPTE standard to be interop. And 2110 WAN, that's in process right now as well. I think that has some time before it's going to be out and available. Yeah, that's what we're waiting for in the future. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
JD, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much. And when we come back, a final story about Rush and me.
Thank you, Gary.
Hi,
Somebody
Steve.
unmuted.
We know what Steve's watching tonight for the news. Good.
Oh, sorry about that.
So introduce yourself.
Steve Borden. I work with Gary, a media infrastructure engineer. I work with Gary proudly with our live team, and he does an amazing job at, he makes it all look he makes it look so simple. I really appreciate all the fine work and the explanation and the effort it took to kind of put this presentation together. So thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Steve. Now, Dan, it's your turn.
I don't know how to follow that. But hi, I'm Dan. I also work with Gary, and I'm just most proud of his collared shirt tonight. It's a very formal thing, which shows how important.
At least a year.
Yeah, shows how important this audience is to him. It's great to see you in your element there, Gary, telling us what it's all about. So much appreciated. I'm glad everybody else got to catch a glimpse of it too.
So yeah,
I don't know if there's time for questions or not. I know Patty,
you can have time. People can go away if they don't want to stick around. But Gary, that was fascinating, and it's really interesting that I'd like you to go back to your original question, because your breaking ice question, because I know I watched NASCAR yesterday or Sunday, and I know that they did some remote productions, and things did in the post-COVID production world. They had to do the dual production both in LA and Tampa, and so it's really interesting. It seems like you guys were ahead of the curve, just making this stuff work, because it's clearly working for you, but I think it's working in the broadcast world also, because of some of the stuff that all of this stuff sort of did force us as engineering teams and stuff like that, to sort of kind of create to make this happen. So it's really interesting, and I'm not sure if anybody on the call, I've got some chats here I'd maybe like to go to, but if anyone else wants to speak up, go right ahead. I'll mute myself.
well, I mean, I'll just say that sports was kind of the motivation for me, and what Pac-12 was doing. In fact, we had a Pac-12 engineer that was working for us for a while, and if you're familiar with how Pac-12 network works, everything is operated out of San Francisco, and they have fiber circuits to all of the Pac-12 venues. And the volleyball for sure, that's all done remote, even remote announcer. Football, maybe they're on-prem, but they still do all the production remotely. And even in 2015, 2016, I saw some of that happening, and I was inspired by it, because Fox Sports Australia, they built a 2110 infrastructure across the continent. They have two control rooms in the Southeast and Southwest, and they're tied to like 8 venues across the continent. And, they can connect either studio to any of the venues. And, it felt a little validating, but at the same time, I mean, they were smoking straight ahead on 2110, and we were still working on TRO4. But there was definitely a lot going on in the industry.
Hey Gary, I didn't hear, I got distracted. Did the question from Jed get answered about how many HD channels can AMP handle in the cloud for live production?
No, I wasn't able to ask him. Go ahead. In the chat room, there's a question: how many HD channels can AMP handle in the cloud for live production?
HD 720.
He didn't specify.
Either 720 or 1080i, either one.
Yeah.
Okay, so 1.5 gig. Well, so I'm not going to put a limit on it. And the reason I'm not is that the way AMP is being designed is to be scalable, horizontally scalable, because their approach is very cloud focused. So it is dependent on the amount of compute that you have. But I do know, I don't know who their customer was, but I do know they did something on the order of a 26 camera shoot, and maybe that was 1080i. So the limits are the processing, and they're making a lot of changes. When it first came out, they were very CPU centric, and you really couldn't deploy a lot onto a CPU VM. But they've made transitions over to more GPU centric VMs, and they're still looking at ways of being able to scale horizontally. So, I mean, I think, contacting Mike or Claudia at Grass, I mean, they can answer that. But I'll tell you, it's not 4, it's not 2. They did a 20+ camera source event, so it can go pretty wide.
Great, thank you, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question, Gary. You said the is all about automation, and I'm not familiar with 2110-WAN, and maybe I should just go look into that. But I was wondering if you can say anything about what the lower level communications, the protocols are that are of most interest when you're controlling disparate pieces of gear. Is it SNMP, or is it REST over an HTTP connection? Is it a proprietary or a de facto standard? Anything you can say about that?
I think I can. And then if Bob Rule calls, then I'll know different. But the first step, has been, is there something that exists that can help us do this function? SIP has been one that's been discussed. When you're talking REST and doing it straight kind of API, I don't know how well that would work versus some other protocol like SIP. And, mostly understanding, as a discovery mechanism or something like that, how that best plays. It's still fairly early on in the process. Surprisingly, I mean, I learned about this at a VidTrans probably 3 years ago, but the TR activity group is still kind of working on it. What we've been kind of playing with, I mean, maybe it's a shotgun approach. That's probably a valid, but what I've been focusing on is how would you encapsulate the multicast and be able to transport it across a WAN? They throw out the term GRE, but GRE is it's a Cisco protocol, and GRE may create a tunnel, and you may be able to put flows in there, but the receiver side has to understand what to tell the receiver to join what flow, right? And so there has to be a mechanism of, you're going to encapsulate the multicast, you're going to push it across the network, you're going to unwrap it, you're going to NAT it, and that local controller is going to tell the receiver which flow to join based on the communications between the two controllers. The mechanisms for that I can't answer because I don't think it's been determined. But that's kind of like the high level thoughts on how it could work.
Okay.
Hope that helped.
Sean, one thing to mention is VSF is virtual this year and it's free, the VSF event. So they might have some papers or presentations on 2110 WAN.
Yeah, that's Andy Rayner is the one driving that.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I'll take a look into that. Thanks for the tip.
And Sam just posted a link to a knowledge, broadcastknowledge.com. I'm not sure what it is, but you might want to look in the chat room and see the link that Sam posted.
Yeah, I didn't actually look at the link myself. I just typed in 2110 WAN and saw the link on the SMPTE page, so I thought I'd put it up.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think that they have posted some information.
Yeah, it's an Andy Rayner video.
Okay, well, we should probably wrap it up because it's after 8, but thank you so much, Gary. That was really, really interesting, and I think everybody
Thank you
got
for
a
the
lot
invite.
out of that. Bob wants to introduce our next month's speaker. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, just a real quick note that next month's meeting is scheduled. It's also Wednesday, March 17th at 6:30 p.m. And Steve Holmes from Leader America will be doing a presentation. We'll be sending out the information for the meeting in the first week of March with the topic information.
And some of the people that are in this meeting, it's not required that you're a SMPTE member to join our meeting. So if you're interested, get in touch with Mona or myself, and we'll get you on the invitation list and stuff like that for our next month's meeting. And this is recorded. We will post it to anybody that was on the mailing list. If you don't have, if you weren't on the mailing list, contact me or Mona, and we'll get you a link to this recording.
You can also go to SMPTE.org to the Sacramento section and get to our recordings there.
Thank you, Bob. You're so full of information. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up unless you want to say anything else, Gary. Again, thank you very much. Usually we'd present you with a little plaque and maybe a beer, but maybe next year when we get you back.
We'll make Quint do that. Quint will
Okay,
have to-
Quint. Yeah, Quint will do that. We know that.
Yeah, that's usually
no,
not a stretch for me.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about what we do at LinkedIn. And if please find me on LinkedIn, and if we're not connected already, I'd love to be connected, and I'm sure we're in common groups and things like that. One thing I love doing is just kind of talking and shop and learn so much from those kinds of conversations. And this is the second meeting. I mean, I've watched some of these meetings VOD, but I saw the one last week. I did this one, and Steve is next week or next month. Yeah, I want to be on that one too. So
All right.
thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, everybody who joined tonight. That was very nice. Hope to see you next month.
Thanks.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, everyone.